Sir, you need to stand up for your sentence like everyone else. I don't care what's wrong with your legs. The court officer's harsh words fill the quiet courtroom as 83-year-old Frank Morrison sits in his wheelchair, his hands shaking on the armrests. Everyone in the packed courtroom stares at the frail old man. The judge hasn't looked up from his papers yet, not knowing that the man before him once crawled through enemy fire to save his entire platoon in Vietnam. What happens next will leave you speechless. If stories like this touch your heart, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments about a veteran who changed your life. Let's honor our heroes together. Frank Morrison had been sitting in that cold metal wheelchair for 3 hours now. His back ached, his legs felt numb, and the fluorescent lights above made everything look harsh and unwelcoming. At 83 years old, he never thought he would end up in a courtroom facing charges for something so simple. It all started 6 months ago when Frank's neighbor complained about his small vegetable garden. The Homeowners Association said it violated their rules. Frank had tried to explain that growing his own food helped him cope with his war memories, but they didn't listen. When he refused to remove the tomatoes and carrots he had planted, they took him to court. The bailiff, a stocky man in his 40s with cold eyes, had been watching Frank since he arrived. He seemed annoyed that Frank couldn't walk like other people. Frank had explained quietly that he lost both legs below the knee in Vietnam, but the bailiff just rolled his eyes and walked away. Now, as Judge Peterson finally looked up from his papers, the bailiff saw his chance to show his authority. The courtroom was packed with people waiting for their own cases, and whispers filled the air as everyone watched the old man in the wheelchair. The bailiff stepped forward, his voice loud and commanding. "Sir, you need to stand up for your sentence. Like everyone else, I don't care what's wrong with your legs." Frank's weathered hands gripped the wheelchair armrests tighter. His voice came out as barely a whisper. I can't stand, sir. I lost my legs in the war." The bailiff's face turned red with anger. "I don't want to hear excuses. Everyone stands for the judge. That's the rule." The crowd in the courtroom began to murmur. Some people shook their heads in disgust at the old man. Others looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. A few young people in the back row started taking videos with their phones, thinking they were witnessing some kind of dramatic scene. "This is ridiculous," said a woman in a business suit sitting in the second row. "If he can't stand, he can't stand. Why is this even an issue?" A man next to her disagreed loudly. "Rules are rules. If he can come to court, he can stand up for 2 minutes. My grandfather fought in World War II and he never made excuses like this." The bailiff felt supported by the crowd's mixed reactions. He moved closer to Frank's wheelchair, his voice getting louder. "Look, old man, I've seen plenty of people try to get sympathy in this courtroom. You're not special. Stand up, or I'll hold you in contempt of court." Frank's eyes filled with tears, but not from sadness. These were tears of frustration and anger that he had held back for decades. He had faced enemy bullets, carried wounded soldiers through dangerous jungles, and survived things that would break most people. But here in this American courtroom, he was being treated like a criminal for not being able to do something his body simply couldn't do. "Sir, please," Frank said, his voice shaking. "I gave my legs for this country. I can't stand because I don't have legs to stand on anymore." The bailiff wasn't backing down. The crowd was watching, and he felt like he needed to maintain control. "I don't care what sob story you have. Everyone has problems. The judge deserves respect, and respect means standing up." Judge Peterson, who had been reading through Frank's case file, finally looked up to see what was causing all the commotion. He was a stern-looking man in his 50s, known for running a strict courtroom, but he had been too focused on his paperwork to notice the confrontation building in front of him. "What's going on here?" Judge Peterson asked, his voice cutting through the noise. The bailiff straightened up, feeling confident. "Your Honor, this man refuses to stand for sentencing. He's being disrespectful to the court." The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Some people were getting upset. Others were pulling out their phones to record what they thought would be a dramatic courtroom showdown. A few veterans in the audience recognized something familiar in Frank's tired eyes, but they stayed quiet, not wanting to cause more trouble. Frank looked up at the judge, his voice barely audible above the crowd noise. "Your Honor, I'm in a wheelchair. I lost both my legs in Vietnam. I can't stand up. The bailiff interrupted before the judge could respond. Your Honor, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen every excuse in the book. This man drove himself here. He can move around. He's just being stubborn because he doesn't want to follow the rules. The courtroom erupted in arguments. People were shouting over each other, some defending Frank, others supporting the bailiff. The young people with phones were recording everything, already planning to post it online with dramatic captions. A middle-aged woman stood up from her seat. This is disgusting. Let the old man sit down. A man in a suit yelled back, The law is the law, no exceptions. Another voice from the crowd shouted, He's probably faking it for attention. Frank sat in the middle of it all, feeling smaller and more helpless than he had felt since he was 19 years old, and lying in a hospital bed in Saigon, learning that his legs were gone forever. The noise around him started to fade as memories came flooding back. He remembered the day it happened, March 15, 1968. His platoon was surrounded by enemy forces in the thick jungle. 3 of his brothers-in-arms were wounded and couldn't move. Frank had already been shot in the leg, but he kept going back to get them. On his 4th trip, stepping on a hidden mine changed everything. He remembered waking up in the hospital, looking down at where his legs used to be. The doctor, a tired-looking man with kind eyes, explained that they had to take both legs below the knee to save his life. Frank had cried then, not for himself, but because he couldn't stop thinking about the 3 soldiers he had managed to save. The bailiff's voice brought him back to the present. Your Honor, I think we need to make an example here. If we let one person sit down, everyone will want special treatment. Judge Peterson was still trying to understand what was happening. He looked at Frank's file again, noticing for the first time that it mentioned the defendant was a disabled veteran. He had been so focused on the Homeowners Association complaint that he hadn't paid attention to those details. The crowd was getting louder and more divided. Some people were standing up now, pointing fingers at each other, arguing about respect and rules and what America really stood for. The bailiff was enjoying the support he was getting from part of the crowd, feeling like he was doing the right thing by maintaining order. This is exactly what's wrong with our country today, shouted a man in a red baseball cap. Everyone wants special treatment instead of following the rules. An elderly woman in the front row stood up slowly, her voice shaking with emotion. That man served our country. Show some respect. The red cap man fired back. So did my son. He died in Afghanistan and he never asked for special treatment. The argument was spreading through the entire courtroom now. People were taking sides, and the bailiff was feeling more confident about his position. He looked at Judge Peterson, waiting for support. Frank closed his eyes, trying to block out the noise and the pain. Not the physical pain. He had learned to live with that decades ago. This was a different kind of pain, the kind that came from feeling invisible and forgotten in the country he had sacrificed everything to serve. He thought about his wife, Mary, who had died 2 years ago. She always knew what to say when people didn't understand. She would hold his hand and remind him that he was a hero, even when the world didn't see it that way. But Mary wasn't here now, and Frank felt more alone than ever. The bailiff decided to take control of the situation. He moved even closer to Frank's wheelchair, his voice rising above the crowd. Sir, I'm giving you one last chance. Stand up for the judge or face the consequences. Frank opened his eyes and looked around the courtroom. He saw the faces of strangers arguing about his life, his service, his worth as a person. He saw the bailiff standing over him like a bully on a playground. He saw the judge looking confused and overwhelmed, but then something unexpected happened. Judge Peterson stood up from his bench. The courtroom gradually grew quiet as people noticed the judge's movement. He wasn't looking at Frank with anger or frustration. Instead, his eyes were filled with something that looked like recognition and deep shame. The judge's voice was soft but clear enough for everyone to hear. Bailiff, step back. The bailiff looked confused. Your Honor, I was just trying to maintain order and respect for the court. Judge Peterson's expression grew more serious. Step back, now. The judge walked down from his bench, something that rarely happened in his courtroom. The crowd watched in stunned silence as he approached Frank's wheelchair. But instead of demanding that Frank stand, Judge Peterson did something that no one expected. He knelt down beside Frank's wheelchair. The courtroom fell completely silent. Even the people who had been arguing moments before stopped talking. Judge Peterson's voice was gentle but strong enough for everyone to hear. "Sir, I apologize. I apologize for my bailiff's behavior, and I apologize for not paying attention to who you are and what you've been through." Frank looked at the judge with surprise and confusion. His voice came out as a whisper. "Your Honor, you don't need to apologize to me." Judge Peterson shook his head. "Yes, I do. I've been reading your file, Mr. Morrison. Frank Morrison, isn't it?" Frank nodded, still not understanding what was happening. The judge continued, his voice growing stronger. "You served 3 tours in Vietnam. You were awarded the Silver Star for saving the lives of 3 fellow soldiers. You lost both legs below the knee when you stepped on a mine while carrying wounded men to safety." The crowd was listening now, their earlier arguments forgotten. Some people looked ashamed of the things they had said. Others were starting to understand that they had been wrong about the old man in the wheelchair. Judge Peterson wasn't finished. "After the war, you came home to a country that didn't welcome you. You worked for 30 years as a mechanic, supporting your family despite your disabilities. You raised 2 children who both became teachers. You volunteered at the VA hospital for 15 years, helping other veterans adjust to life after combat." Frank's eyes were filling with tears again. But these were different tears. These were tears of being seen, of being recognized, of being valued. The judge's voice grew emotional. "And now, at 83 years old, you're in my courtroom because you wanted to grow vegetables in your backyard to help deal with your war. Memories and your homeowners association decided that was more important than honoring a man who gave everything for his country." The bailiff was standing frozen, realizing that he had made a terrible mistake. The crowd was completely silent now, many people wiping away their own tears. Judge Peterson looked around the courtroom, his voice firm and clear. "This man doesn't need to stand for me. I need to stand for him. We all do." And then, something beautiful happened. Judge Peterson stood up and saluted Frank Morrison. A few seconds later, an elderly man in the 3rd row stood up and saluted too. Then a woman who had been arguing earlier stood and placed her hand over her heart. One by one, people throughout the courtroom began to stand. The bailiff, realizing his mistake, slowly came to attention and saluted as well. Frank sat in his wheelchair, overwhelmed by the respect and honor he was finally receiving. He saluted back, his weathered hand shaking with emotion. Judge Peterson returned to his bench, but his tone was completely different now. "Mr. Morrison, regarding the charges against you for violating homeowners association rules, this court finds you not guilty. You have every right to grow vegetables in your backyard, and anyone who tries to stop you will answer to me personally." The courtroom erupted in applause. People were crying, hugging each other, and some were even apologizing to Frank directly. But Judge Peterson wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I'm ordering the Homeowners Association to pay all of Mr. Morrison's legal fees and to issue a formal apology. And I'm recommending that the City Council name Mr. Morrison's Street Heroes Way in honor of his service." The applause grew louder. Frank was crying openly now, but these were tears of joy and relief. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged, like his service mattered, like he was valued. After the courtroom cleared, Judge Peterson approached Frank personally. "Mr. Morrison, I want you to know that my own father served in Vietnam. He came home different, and our family never really understood what he went through. I wish I had been there to stand up for him the way I should have stood up for you from the beginning." Frank reached out and shook the judge's hand. "Your Honor, thank you for seeing me. That's all any of us really want, to be seen." As Frank wheeled out of the courtroom that day, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt proud. Proud of his service, proud of his sacrifices, and proud to be an American in a country that, despite its flaws, still had people willing to do the right thing when it mattered most. The bailiff approached Frank as he was leaving. His voice was quiet and full of regret. "Sir, I owe you an apology. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. My job is to maintain respect in that courtroom, and I failed to show you the respect you deserve." Frank looked at the bailiff, and saw a man who had learned something important that day. Son, we all make mistakes. What matters is what we do. After we realize we're wrong, you did the right thing in the end. 6 months later, Frank Morrison was invited to speak at the local high school's Veterans Day ceremony. He wheeled onto the stage to thunderous applause and told the students about the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. He also told them about the day in the courtroom when a judge knelt down to honor a veteran, and how that moment reminded him that America is still a country worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, and worth believing in. The story of Frank Morrison and Judge Peterson spread far beyond that courtroom. It became a reminder that respect isn't about following rules blindly. It's about recognizing the humanity and sacrifice in each other, especially in those who have given everything for their country. And every time someone tells this story, they remember that sometimes the greatest moments of justice come not when we demand that others stand for us, but when we choose to stand for them.